The profound stillness of 6 p.m. was a secret Helena kept for herself. In the soft, pre-dawn light that filtered through the kitchen window, the world seemed to be holding its breath, and in that quiet, she could finally hear her own thoughts. The house was a sleeping giant, its usual symphony of footsteps, laughter, and television murmurs silenced for now. This single hour, cradled between the deep blue of night and the eventual gold of morning, was her sanctuary. It was here, with a steaming mug of black coffee warming her hands, that she could simply be Helena, not a wife or a mother, but a woman reflecting in the silence. Her work, the vast and intricate machinery that kept their family's universe spinning, was designed to be invisible. It was an art form of subtlety and anticipation. It wasn't just the laundry, but knowing to wash Richard's favorite shirt the day before a big meeting. It wasn't just packing Sophia's lunch, but remembering to cut the crust off her sandwich and tucking in a little hand-drawn note that would make her smile. It was the emotional and logistical acrobatics of managing doctor's appointments, parent-teacher conferences, and the delicate ecosystem of Sophia's friendships. She was the household's historian, its strategist, its chief financial officer managing a budget with meticulous care, and its tireless operations manager. This sprawling, all-consuming role had no title, no salary, and most painfully, no acknowledgement. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee, the bitter warmth of familiar comfort. Her gaze fell upon a framed photograph on the wall, a sun-drenched memory from a beach vacation last summer. Richard was holding Sophia on his shoulders, both of them caught mid-laugh, their faces tilted towards a sky of impossible blue. Helena was beside them, her own smile wide and genuine. That photo was the thesis statement of her life, the reason behind every sacrifice. For that joy, for that sense of family, she would move mountains. Yet, a quiet bitterness had begun to seep into the foundations of that joy, like a slow water leak. It was a feeling she fought against, a guilt that pricked at her conscience whenever it surfaced. Richard was a good man. She knew this in her bones. He worked tirelessly at his architectural firm, his long hours a testament to his desire to provide for them. He would often come home, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion, and still find the energy to praise her cooking or read Sophia a bedtime story. He loved them, but his love was filtered through a lens of obliviousness. Just last week, as she was juggling a pot on the stove while helping Sophia with a complex math problem, he had walked in, kissed her on the cheek, and said with a weary sigh, "You're so lucky you don't have to deal with deadlines and demanding clients." He hadn't meant it to be cruel. He simply didn't see the deadlines she faced every single day. The dinner that had to be on the table by 6:30, the permission slip that had to be signed by morning, the finite window of time to soothe a child's nightmare. His world had colleagues and bosses. Hers had timetables written in invisible ink. Today, the pressure was immense. They were hosting a dinner party that felt less like a social gathering and more like a high-stakes corporate merger. Richard's boss, the formidable Mr. Harrison, and his wife were attending, along with another senior partner who held the key to Richard's potential promotion. This promotion was the culmination of 2 years of his relentless effort, and Helena knew her role tonight was critical. She was not just the hostess. She was part of the pitch. The house had to be immaculate, the atmosphere warm and inviting, the food nothing short of spectacular. The slow-roasted lamb had been marinating for 24 hours in a blend of herbs she'd perfected over years. The chocolate for the lava cakes was a specific Belgian brand she'd had to drive to a specialty store to find. The table linens had been ironed twice to ensure not a single crease marred their surface. This dinner was her stage, her performance. And yet, she knew with a familiar, sinking feeling that she would be treated as part of the scenery, a gracious, smiling accessory to her husband's success. The first rays of sun finally broke through the gray, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. The giant was waking up. Helena took one last sip of her coffee, the final moment of peace dissolving. She rinsed the mug and placed it silently in the dishwasher. Her workday, in all its unseen glory, was about to begin. The day unfolded exactly as Helena had foreseen, a tightly choreographed ballet of domestic tasks. No sooner had she put her coffee mug away than Sophia padded into the kitchen, her hair a wild tangle, her pajamas on inside out. "Mommy, I can't find Mr. Snuggles," she announced, her lower lip trembling with the imminent threat of a full-blown crisis. Helena's mind, which was already calculating the roasting time for the lamb, immediately switched gears. She dried her hands, knelt, and enveloped her daughter in a hug that smelled of coffee and quiet determination. "Okay, sweet pea, Let's launch a search and rescue mission. You check under your bed and I'll check the living room fort. 15 minutes later, with Mystery Snuggles safely recovered from behind a sofa cushion, and Sophia happily eating her oatmeal, Helena was finally able to turn her attention back to the dinner. The lamb, a magnificent cut of meat, sat waiting on the counter. She patted it dry with a focus worthy of a surgeon, massaging the garlic, rosemary, and salt into every surface. This wasn't just cooking. It was a ritual, an infusion of care and effort that she hoped would be tasted in every bite. While the oven preheated, she blitzed the ingredients for the chimichurri, cleaned the morning's dishes, and laid out Sophia's school uniform. It was a constant, fluid motion, a dance of multitasking she had perfected over 7 years. Around noon, her phone buzzed. It was Richard. "Hey, honey," he said, his voice distant, likely distracted by something on his computer screen. "Just checking in. Everything on track for tonight?" Helena looked around the kitchen. Flour dusted the counter from the cake preparation, a pot of stock simmered on the stove, and a mountain of vegetables waited to be chopped. "Yes, everything is on track," she said, her voice betraying none of the exhaustion she already felt. Great. Remember, Mr. Harrison loves a good single malt. I put the bottle on the top shelf of the bar cart. Make sure the good crystal is out, okay? This night needs to be perfect." "I remember," she said softly. "The good crystal," she thought, "which I will have to hand wash tomorrow because it's too delicate for the dishwasher. I'll make sure everything is perfect. You're the best, Lena. I don't know what I'd do without you. Got to run. See you later." The line went dead. He didn't ask if she needed anything. He didn't ask how she was. He had checked a box on his mental to-do list. Confirm wife is handling dinner. Helena stood there for a moment, the phone in her hand feeling strangely heavy. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The words were meant to be a comfort, but they landed like a stone in her stomach. He didn't know because he had never had to. He had no concept of the architecture that held up his life, the invisible scaffolding she erected and maintained every single day. The afternoon was a blur. She picked Sophia up from school, listening patiently to a sprawling story about a playground dispute while her mind ticked through the remaining tasks. Once home, she set Sophia up with coloring books at the kitchen table, wanting to keep her close. Sophia, a perpetually curious and observant child, watched her mother with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Why are you using the fancy plates, Mommy?" she asked, looking at the fine china Helena was carefully placing on the dining room table. "Because we have special guests coming tonight, sweetie. It's a very important dinner for Daddy." "Is it more important than your birthday dinner?" Helena paused, a plate halfway to the table. They'd just had pizza for her birthday last month at her request, to keep things simple. "No, of course not, honey. It's just a different kind of important." As the clock ticked past 5, the house was transformed. The air hung rich with the scent of roasting lamb and garlic. The dining table was a picture of understated elegance, with polished silverware and sparkling glasses. Helena, however, was a whirlwind of last-minute preparations. She was whisking the sauce, checking the potatoes, and arranging appetizers on a platter when Richard walked in at 6 o'clock, looking fresh and confident in his suit. He surveyed the scene, his eyes scanning the immaculate living room and the beautifully set table. He walked over to the bar cart and nodded in approval at the bottle of single malt and the gleaming crystal glasses. He then came into the kitchen, kissed a harried Helena on the cheek, and said, "Smells incredible, Lena. See? I knew you had it all under control." He then turned and headed upstairs to take a quick shower, leaving her alone in the epicenter of the beautiful, perfect world she had single-handedly created. Helena stood in the center of the living room, taking a final sweeping glance. Every cushion was plumped, every surface free of dust, and the lighting was soft and golden, casting a warm, inviting glow. She had just finished changing into a simple but elegant navy blue dress, a stark contrast to the flour-dusted apron she had been wearing only moments before. She had traded the harried, functional ponytail for soft waves that framed her face, and a touch of makeup masked the fatigue in her eyes. It was another one of her invisible skills, the rapid, seamless transformation from head chef and logistics manager to effortless hostess. The doorbell chimed at precisely 7 o'clock, its cheerful two-note sound cutting through the quiet anticipation. Richard, who had just descended the stairs smelling of expensive aftershave, gave her a quick, approving nod. "Showtime," he whispered, a confident smile playing on his lips as he opened the door. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison were the first to arrive. He was a man who seemed to carry his corporate authority like a well-tailored suit, imposing, sharp, and with an air of perpetual evaluation. His wife, a woman draped in silk and quiet jewelry, offered a polite, practiced smile. "Richard, good to see you," Mr. Harrison boomed, his voice filling the entryway. "And this must be the lovely Helena. Richard tells me you're the one who makes all this magic happen." Helena felt a flicker of hope at his words. He sees. But the hope was quickly extinguished by the patronizing pat he gave her arm, a gesture one might offer to a charming child. "It's a pleasure to have you in our home, Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Harrison," Helena said, her voice smooth and gracious. "Please come in." As she took their coats, the second couple, the Morrisons, arrived. Mark Morrison was the senior partner, a man with a much quieter, more observant demeanor than his boss. His wife, Clara, had a warmth in her eyes that immediately put Helena at ease. "Your home is beautiful, Helena," Clara said, her gaze taking in the details Helena had spent all day perfecting. "It feels so welcoming." "Thank you, Clara. I'm so glad you could make it." As Richard led the men to the bar cart to pour the celebrated single malt, Helena guided the women into the living room. The conversation started with the usual pleasantries, the weather, the traffic, a recent community event. Helena moved with an easy grace, offering appetizers, ensuring everyone had a drink, her mind a silent checklist of social cues and hospitality tasks. She was a participant, yes, but she was also the conductor of the evening's symphony, subtly guiding the tempo and ensuring every instrument played in harmony. Sophia, scrubbed clean and dressed in her favorite red dress, made a brief, well-rehearsed appearance. She shook hands politely, answered a few questions about school with a shy smile, and then, as planned, gave her parents a kiss goodnight and trotted off to her room, where a new movie was waiting for her as a reward for her perfect performance. "She's a delightful little girl," Mrs. Harrison commented, her eyes following Sophia down the hall. "You're lucky to be able to spend so much time with her." "I am very lucky," Helena agreed, a genuine warmth filling her chest. "I had to go back to work when our boys were just toddlers," Mrs. Harrison continued with a sigh. "The nanny raised them, really. It's so wonderful that you don't have to work, that you have the luxury of focusing on your family." There it was again. That word, luxury. As if her days were spent lounging on a chaise lounge, eating chocolates, instead of in a perpetual state of motion. It was a common assumption, a casual dismissal of her reality. Before Helena could formulate a response, Richard's voice boomed from across the room. He had overheard the tail end of the conversation as he brought over a fresh round of drinks. "That's right," he said, beaming with a pride that made Helena's stomach clench. "Mylena doesn't have to work a day in her life. I take care of everything so she can focus on the important stuff, like making our home beautiful and raising our daughter." He said it with such sincerity, such genuine belief, that it was somehow more painful than if he had been malicious. In his mind, he was paying her a compliment, elevating her to a pedestal of pampered domesticity. He had no idea he was simultaneously erasing her, rendering her immense contribution invisible in a single, careless sentence. Helena saw the polite, affirming nods from the Harrisons. She saw the slightly more thoughtful, perhaps even questioning look in Clara Morrison's eyes. But mostly she felt a profound sense of isolation, as if a glass wall had just descended between her and the rest of the room. She was the architect of this perfect evening, yet in the narrative being told, she was merely a decorative feature within it. She forced a smile, a tight, brittle thing that didn't quite reach her eyes. The scent of rosemary and garlic wafted from the kitchen, a reminder of the hours of labor that had just been so casually and completely dismissed. "If everyone would like to move to the dining room," Helena announced, her voice a perfect imitation of calm composure. "I believe the first course is ready." The announcement was a welcome interruption, pulling everyone out of the awkward moment her husband had created. As they took their seats at the elegantly set table, a new wave of compliments filled the air. "My goodness, Helena, this looks like something out of a magazine," Clara Morrison said, her genuine appreciation a small balm on Helena's frayed nerves. The first course was a delicate, creamy asparagus soup, served in pristine white bowls and garnished with a swirl of lemon-infused olive oil and toasted almonds. It was light, sophisticated, and perfectly executed. As the guests tasted it, a chorus of "mms" and "this is divine" echoed around the table. Richard sat at the head of the table, beaming like a proud producer whose show had just opened to rave reviews. "She's got a real talent, doesn't she?" he said, addressing Mr. Harrison. "Anything she sets her mind to, she masters. Planning, cooking, decorating, you name it." He spoke of her skills as if they were charming hobbies, like knitting or watercolor painting, rather than the components of a demanding full-time profession. "You're a lucky man, Richard," Mr. Harrison replied, scraping the last drop of soup from his bowl. A beautiful home, a talented wife, a wonderful child. It's the whole package. It shows stability. It shows you've got your life in order. That's important for a man in your position. The conversation flowed easily from there, guided by Richard toward his favorite subject, work. He and the other men discussed market trends, a challenging new project downtown, and the grueling hours required to stay ahead in the competitive world of architecture. Helena listened, chiming in when appropriate, but mostly she moved in and out of the kitchen with a silent, practiced efficiency. She cleared the soup bowls and then presented the main course. The lamb was the star of the show. Roasted to a perfect medium rare, it rested on a bed of rosemary-scented potatoes, surrounded by vibrant green asparagus. She brought it to the table on a large rustic wooden board, the aroma of garlic, herbs, and roasted meat filling the room and silencing the conversation for a moment of pure, unadulterated awe. She carved it herself, each slice falling away perfectly. "Helena, this is a work of art," Mark Morrison said, his quiet voice filled with sincere admiration. As they ate, the praise was effusive. The lamb was tender, flavorful, and cooked to perfection. The potatoes were crispy on the outside and fluffy on the inside. The sauce was a masterpiece of balance. Helena felt a familiar, fleeting sense of pride, the pride of an artist who has her work admired. But the admiration was directed at the product, not the process, and certainly not the producer. The conversation eventually circled back to the sacrifices of a demanding career. Mrs. Harrison, sipping her wine, grew reflective. "You know," she said with a wistful smile, "I look at what you have here, Helena, and I feel a pang of envy. When the boys were growing up, I was always running between the office and a flight. I missed school plays. I missed bedtime stories. I had a full-time career, yes, but I feel like I outsourced their childhoods. You can't put a price on the time you're getting to spend with Sophia." Richard seized the moment, placing his fork down and leaning forward as if to share a profound truth. He looked around the table, his expression earnest and proud. "And that's the whole point," he announced grandly. "I work as hard as I do so that Helena doesn't have to. I told her from the very beginning, you focus on building a life, and I'll focus on paying for it. And guests come over and they compliment the food or the decor, but what they don't realize is that all of this is possible because my wife has no other distractions. She doesn't have a job." The words hung in the air, heavy and definitive. He had said it, not as a casual remark this time, but as the cornerstone of his life's philosophy, a declaration of his magnanimity. She doesn't have a job. It was a public branding, a final, indelible stamp. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't just awkward. It was thick with the weight of his pronouncement. And into that thick silence, a small voice emerged. "But she buys all the food, though." Every head turned. Standing in the doorway of the dining room, rubbing her sleepy eyes, was Sophia. She was in her pajamas, her hair slightly askew, clutching Mr. Snuggles by one ear. She must have woken up and padded downstairs, drawn by the murmur of voices. Richard stared, momentarily confused. "Sophia, what are you doing up, sweet pea?" Sophia blinked, looking at the table laden with the remnants of the feast. She looked at the guests, their faces a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Then she looked at her mother. Her expression wasn't one of defiance or accusation. It was one of simple, childlike logic, an attempt to reconcile two conflicting pieces of information. "You said Mommy doesn't work," she said, her voice clear and unwavering in the quiet room. "But she goes to the grocery store all the time. She buys the food, and she cooks it all day, and she cleans everything, and she buys my clothes. And that's a lot of work." She finished with a little yawn, as if the effort of listing her mother's responsibilities had exhausted her. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a deafening, profound quiet that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Mr. Harrison's fork, halfway to his mouth, froze in midair. Mrs. Harrison's polite smile had vanished, replaced by a look of wide-eyed astonishment. Clara Morrison, however, lowered her head slightly to hide a small, knowing smile, her eyes flicking toward Helena with a look of immense respect. Richard was speechless. His face, which moments before had been a mask of confident pride, was now a canvas of utter bewilderment. He looked from his daughter to his wife, his mouth slightly agape, as if he was hearing a foreign language for the first time. But Helena barely noticed the others. Her entire world had narrowed to the small figure standing in the doorway. She stared at her daughter, at this tiny, 7-year-old human who had seen her, truly, completely, and incandescently seen her in a way no one else ever had. Sophia hadn't just listed chores. She had validated a lifetime of invisible labor. A dam inside Helena broke, and a flood of emotion washed over her. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden, spilling over and tracing silent paths down her cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness or of anger. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief, the relief of being recognized. The silence in the dining room stretched for what felt like an eternity, thick with unspoken thoughts. Sophia, having delivered her simple, devastating truth, simply yawned again, oblivious to the emotional bomb she had just detonated. It was Clara Morrison who finally broke the spell. She turned her warm gaze from Sophia to Helena, and then to the rest of the table. A gentle smile touched her lips. "Out of the mouths of babes," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Sophia's right, of course. My grandmother used to say that running a home is like running a small, essential nation. It requires a diplomat, a chef, a financier, and a leader. And it is most certainly work." She raised her glass slightly in Helena's direction. "And from what I've seen tonight, Helena, you are doing a phenomenal job." The tension in the room didn't disappear, but it changed. It was as if Clara had opened a window, letting in a breath of fresh air. Mrs. Harrison managed a tight, slightly flustered smile, while her husband cleared his throat and took a sudden, intense interest in the pattern on his plate. But the most profound change was in Richard. He looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. The confident, proud man from moments before had vanished, replaced by someone lost and uncertain. He looked at the half-eaten, magnificent meal on his plate. He looked at the polished glasses and the perfectly arranged flowers. He looked at his wife's tear-streaked face. And for the first time, it seemed, he wasn't just looking. He was seeing. He was seeing the hours, the effort, the planning, the sheer, relentless work that it all represented. He slowly turned to his daughter. "You should be in bed, sweet pea," he said, his voice husky with an emotion Helena had never heard from him before. Helena rose from her chair, her legs feeling slightly unsteady. She walked over to Sophia, knelt down, and wiped her own tears away with the back of her hand. "Come on, my love," she whispered, her voice thick with love and gratitude. "Let's get you back to bed." She took Sophia's small hand, and as they walked out of the room, she felt the eyes of everyone on her. But for the first time all night, she didn't feel like an object on display. She felt like the most important person in the room. The rest of the dinner was a quiet affair. The conversation was stilted, polite. The spectacular chocolate lava cakes were eaten with quiet compliments, but the grand, boisterous energy of the evening was gone, replaced by a somber, reflective mood. Richard barely spoke a word. He was a ghost at his own table, his mind clearly elsewhere. When the guests finally left, the goodbyes were telling. Mr. Harrison gave Richard a firm, unreadable look and a brisk handshake. But Clara Morrison bypassed Richard and went straight to Helena, enveloping her in a warm hug. "Thank you for a truly memorable evening, Helena," she whispered, and Helena knew she didn't just mean the food. When the front door closed, the silence that fell was different from the one that had followed Sophia's words. It was a heavy, waiting silence, filled with the presence of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Richard stood in the entryway, his shoulders slumped, looking not at her, but at the elegant, perfect home she had created. I'll just start on the dishes," he murmured, his voice sounding hollow in the quiet hall. He turned and walked, not into the living room, but toward the kitchen. Helena went upstairs and found Sophia fast asleep, Mr. Snuggles tucked firmly under her arm. She kissed her daughter's forehead, a silent thank you for the gift she had given her. When she came back downstairs, she found Richard standing awkwardly in the kitchen, a plate in one hand and a sponge in the other, as if he didn't know what to do with them. He looked up as she entered, his eyes filled with a humility she had never seen. "I'm so sorry, Lena," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." Helena leaned against the counter, her body weary but her heart full. "What are you sorry for, Richard?" "For all of it," he said, his gesture taking in the kitchen, the house, the years. "For not seeing. For talking about your life as if it were a vacation. For taking credit for a success that was built on your back. Tonight, when she said that, it was like a light switched on in a room I didn't even know was dark. I saw you. I saw all the work. And I was so ashamed." Tears were now streaming down his face. "I love you," he said. "And I have been failing you every single day by not honoring what you do. It is work. It's the most important work of all. And I promise, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know that I see it, and that I see you. Helena walked over to him and gently took the plate from his hand, placing it on the counter. She took his face in her hands and looked directly into his eyes. I know you love me, Richard, she said softly. I've never doubted that. I just needed you to see me, that's all. He leaned into her touch, and they stood there for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of the kitchen, surrounded by the beautiful, chaotic, wonderful evidence of a day's work. It wasn't an end. It was a beginning. The next morning, when Helena came downstairs at 6 a.m. for her golden hour, she found a single steaming mug of coffee waiting for her on the counter. Next to it was a small, hand-drawn note, in a script that was clearly Richard's, trying to imitate the ones she left for Sophia. It had a drawing of a stick figure holding a grocery bag, and underneath it, just 3 words: "Thank you for your work." Sometimes the most profound changes in our lives don't come from grand gestures, but from the quiet moments when we are finally seen for who we are. The work of building a home, of raising a family, of tending to the hearts of those we love, is the most essential work there is. It may not come with a paycheck or a title, but its value is immeasurable. It's written in the smiles of our children, in the comfort of a shared meal, and in the quiet strength of a family built on love and, most importantly, on recognition. If this story reminded you of someone in your life whose work goes unseen, perhaps now is the perfect moment to tell them that you see them. Thank you for joining us for this story. If it touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe and join our community for more stories that celebrate the deep, emotional truths of our lives.